Hello and welcome to another anime lore and theory video. I'm Shergok, your host, and today we are going to take a closer look at what Ainz Ooal Gown did and how he felt in the first few hours after he was sent to the new world, and how all of this led to the rescue of Enri and Nemu. But before we're going to take a closer look at any of this, let me quickly thank my patrons for supporting this channel, as well as say thanks to all users of the YouTube thanks function for making one-time donations. And with that said, let's get to the topic at hand. Being transported to a new world has become such a standard trope in many anime that it is no longer a big deal, which I find unfortunate. The early parts of Mushoku Tensei were compelling because we saw how Rudeus gradually adjusted to his new life, and how the world opened up bit by bit, giving the series a slice of life feel. And this allowed the world to develop depth and impact later on in the series. And that's why I'm glad that Overlord did something similar, even if not throughout multiple books. But nonetheless, we did get to see how Ainz Ooal Gown dealt with the fact that he was now an Undead Overlord in the new world, that he had left all of his friends and relatives behind, and now had to navigate this unfamiliar new world all by his own. And the first phase Ainz Ooal Gown went through was utter confusion. He couldn't understand why the lockout button from his video game suddenly wasn't working anymore, and why he couldn't just leave the game. After all, he had to go to bed. There would be a long workday tomorrow. But when nothing worked, Ainz began to wonder what could be the cause of it. Maybe there had been some surprise launch of Yggdrasil Online 2.0 or something similar. However, for several reasons, this seemed highly unlikely to him. For once, you should be still able to log out. Also, such a launch wouldn't happen at midnight. Moreover, the internet, which connects players' brains and senses to the game, is in the world of 2138 heavily regulated, much more so than our current network. And the idea of players being kidnapped would be unheard of, and would be severely punished. In other words, the idea that this was Yggdrasil 2.0 was absurd. Ainz Ooal Gown also noticed something significant when Albedo came closer: how good she smelled. In Yggdrasil Online, there was no sense of smell. How could there be one? The connection between the brain and the game world was at the neck, while the nerve for smell goes directly from the nose into the brain, without taking a detour through the neck. And that's why the VR headset was necessary to make it possible to even view the world of Yggdrasil Online, because the eyes are also directly connected to the brain. So even if this was really Yggdrasil Online 2.0, the sudden sense of smell made it an impossibility. And even if it was possible to smell something without any input and any direct connection to the nerves that transport the sense of smell, even if this was possible, his VR setup didn't even have the bandwidth to handle all of the new updates and the new information being passed through to his brain and back to the game. In other words, Ainz was now certain that he wasn't in a digital world after all, but rather, as absurd as it sounded to him, this world had materialized, or he had been transported into it. In any case, it had become real and was now tangible and experiential, just like our own reality. And this led Ainz Ooal Gown to one of the most logical ways to test whether or not he was still in some kind of video game: through improper behavior. In Yggdrasil Online, it was common to be in the body of an extremely attractive character, and to prevent you to suddenly be, at least in part, in another's attractive character's body, any inappropriate touch would immediately result in a kick, meaning a ban from the game for life, as in you could never ever play it again. And remember, this is a world where they could probably identify you by your very own brain structure, so there's no way to circumvent the ban. And since Yggdrasil Online had already officially gone offline, it wouldn't be a loss anymore to be banned anyway, And that's why Ainz Ooal Gown decided to manually investigate Albedo's plot more closely. And the fact that there was no reaction and no ejection from the game, which combined with all of the other factors could only mean that everything was real, was the final straw that made him realize that this is his new reality now. And at this point, Ainz Ooal Gown began to experience a brief panic, as the person inside the avatar, this Undead Overlord, realized that he was now alone in a layer full of monsters, of whom many were, at least on paper, much stronger than he was. In other words, if even just a few percent of the NPCs decided to attack Ainz, it would be the end for him. But despite being cut off from his world, and now very vulnerable, Ainz quickly calmed down, and he was attributing this reaction to a quote from Punito Moe, one of his friends, teammates, and the tactician of his guild. However, it was actually due to his new undead body suppressing his own emotions. In other words, the panic didn't last long. Ainz then gave the order to Sebas to scout the surroundings, and to Albedo to gather the Floor Guardians. And finally, he went to two different places himself. The first was Le Megaton, the antechamber to the throne room, where he addressed the golems there, instructing them to swear loyalty to him and him alone. And since they were constructs, they had far less free will and personality than special NPCs like Demiurge or Shizu Delta, for example, making them ideal candidates to see what would happen if Ainz, as the Overlord, issued very strict commands. After realizing that at least the golems were still probably controllable and loyal to him as their player, he did the same with the golems in the amphitheater on the 6th floor. This way Ainz gained powerful allies who could help him escape if the Floor Guardians attacked him for any reason. Moreover, the arena where Ainz Ooal Gown together with Ulbert and his other comrades had once fought off invaders would serve as an ideal battlefield to eliminate potential hostile forces. In this case, the Floor Guardians, as they would have to defend themselves not only against Ainz Ooal Gown, but also against the golems, attacking from all sides. Strengthened by this, Ainz could now begin to bring Aura and Mare to his side. The Floor Guardians arrived first, and he demonstrated the power of the guild item, his Staff of Ainz Ooal Gown, to them, while being very kind to both of them. In other words, he wanted to ensure that Aura and Mare, in the event of a betrayal by the Floor Guardians, would fight on his side. This way, not all of the Floor Guardians would be against him. And even if this happened, Aura with his many beasts, and Mare with his earthquakes, were an ideal counter, and therefore vital to bring both to his side. Furthermore, Ainz demonstrated that even if Aura and Mare did not side with him, any betrayal would be fatal. And when the other Floor Guardians arrived, Ainz made a mistake. Out of sheer nervousness, during his address, he activated his Aura of Despair at the first level, which induced intense fear. Now normally this would be completely ineffective against a strong level 100 Floor Guardian, as their immunities and stats would be too high for such a weak skill to even affect them. However, Ainz had equipped the Staff of Ainz Ooal Gown, the guild item of Nazarick, which boosted his own stats so much that even Albedo's enormous defense wasn't enough to mentally shield her from the Aura of Despair. So while we perceived Ainz Ooal Gown as nervous and unsure, the Floor Guardians were gripped by fear and terror. To them, Ainz must have sounded more like Sauron than a nervous human. And Ainz was still nervous, but his emotional regulation, a result of his immunity to mind control, prevented anything worse from happening. And with that, the Overlord needed to make sure he got some intel on what happened outside of Nazarick after hearing Sebas' report about being transported into a grassy field with flowers and animals. Instead of the hellish world where the dungeon that would later become the Great Tomb of Nazarick was originally discovered in. And when Ainz Ooal Gown tried to get a sense of his surroundings by looking through the mirror of remote viewing, after figuring out how it worked, it became clear to him that something was wrong. He saw a village, noticed excitement and bustling activity in the streets, and initially thought it was a festival and nothing else. But a second glance showed knights systematically eliminating the villagers, and Ainz decided to continue his search elsewhere. He didn't know how strong these people were, or what the situation was, and why the attack happened, so it would have been unwise to get involved. As Enri's father, bleeding with a sword in his back, looked up to the sky and desperately pleaded for some power to save his daughters, Ainz was just about to switch to a different scene. And in that moment, two thoughts crossed his mind. The first was that Ainz, in a calm and rational manner, reflected how strangely he behaved. He was from a dystopian world in the year 2138, had seen much suffering, and had endured hard work. But he was not a fighter, not a soldier, nor someone who had seen much bloodshed and violence in his real life. He wasn't cold-hearted enough to be indifferent to human suffering. So why was he able to look at such horrific scenes without being affected? How could he look into the eyes of a dying father who was desperately pleading for the lives of his daughters without feeling anything? Was it his new body that made him cold? Did it also affect his mind? And secondly, Ainz thought of Touch Me, and how he had once saved him from the attackers in the game of Yggdrasil Online. And so, Ainz now wanted to prove himself worthy of his friend, so he ordered Sebas to mobilize the troops, and Albedo to put on her armor, while Ainz himself acted as the vanguard, and went out. Not because he cared about the lives of these villagers, but because he wanted to prove himself worthy of his dear friend Touch Me, and pay him back, that way, for his own rescue. The emotional connections he had once with his friends in his past life were still very important to him, and potent enough to affect his actions, despite his current state, while the new social contacts had lost any significance because he could no longer feel much. The strong emotions he once had felt for his guildmates were his only emotions that he still remembered vividly. And they were the only things that could motivate him, since all other emotions were now dulled. And that is the true reason why he saved Enri and Nemu Amot, not because the villagers meant anything to him, or because their fate moved him, but because Ainz still longed for his friends. His mother and father were dead, he had no other relatives or close companions left, and his acquaintances, his friends and teammates were all online. His guildmates were the most important social contacts he had for more than a decade, the only friendships that he still had, and the only things that still connected him to his humanity. With the image of Touch Me in his mind, Ainz passed through the gate spell he casted, a spell that could connect 2 points in space with a portal. On the other side, members of the Sunlight Scripture had just caught up to the fleeing Enri and Nemu. Even in full armor, equipped with shield and weapon, the trained members of the elite force could effortlessly, and without being out of breath, catch up to the two, who were now way too tired to continue fleeing. But after he had Enri cornered, the knight felt too secure, and he didn't notice Enri preparing a strike, and so she hit him right in the face, not enough to harm him through his helmet, but enough to make him so angry that, in his rage, he swung his sword at the fleeing peasant girl too wildly, hitting her only superficially. He was too caught up in his anger, and rather was flailing the sword at Enri instead of making a proper strike. Nonetheless, the wound was deep and severe enough to make Enri fall over, and she would now try to use her own body to render the sword useless for as long as possible, thus giving her little sister Nemu more time to escape. But as Enri crouched over her little sister, expecting the pain that would end her life, and the impact of the sword that she now had to catch and busy for as long as possible. Nothing happened. The two members of the Sunlight Scripture disguised as the Knights of Baharut stared in disbelief at the undead being that had emerged from the rift in space-time. They hadn't expected anything like this, and before the knight who had wounded Enri could strike again, his life was over. Ainz Ooal Gown had been ready to flee if his favorite spell, Grasp Heart, failed to work, but it worked, and his opponent collapsed lifelessly to the ground. The second knight, who had been staring at Enri with a hateful gaze, averted his gaze in panic and shame and fear when he now looked into the eyes of the Undead Overlord Ainz Ooal Gown. And after a weak spell, the 6th-tiered spell Dragon Lightning, he too was defeated and lay lifeless on the dirt path. He just chased down the two girls. And finally, Ainz Ooal Gown's first taste of battle had taught him something. He was truly an Undead Overlord now, not just in body, but also in spirit. His emotions and feelings had been significantly altered, his mood held within a narrow, monotonous corridor. He could no longer feel great joy, or deep sorrow, or panic or anger or fear for extended periods of time. The control his new body had over his emotions also meant that Satoru Suzuki, an ordinary salaryman, a simple office worker, had no trouble taking his first and second life. While, for example, Rudius Greyrad, in one of the later volumes of Mushoku Tensei, had to struggle with the fact that during the war he had killed people, that his own spells had wiped out allies, and that he was solely responsible for the loss of dozens, if not hundreds of lives, Ainz Ooal Gown felt nothing about the act of killing. This didn't mean that his subconsciousness took over and suppressed all of the impressions that came with the consequences of his actions and spells. No, Ainz was fully aware of what he had just done, and still, no emotions, no disgust, no revulsion clouded his thoughts. He knew he just had ended a life, and he didn't care one bit. He had become undead, not just physically, but also mentally. And this realization about it could not even hit him. And this was something that Ainz Ooal Gown realized again and again, not just in the coming fight against the rest of the Sunlight Scripture later on, but also, for example, on the Cuts plane. But maybe more about that in another video. And for now, that's all. And now it's your turn. What's your opinion on Ainz Ooal Gown's first day in the new world? How would you have behaved if you had been in Ainz's place? Feel free to let me know it down in the comment section. And while you're typing, I'd like to say thank you very much for watching, thanks to all of my Patreons for supporting this channel, and, as usual, special thanks to Ada Daddy Ada, ASK, Bad Guy Ye, Bad Burrito 316, Bezer, Ben C, Brandon D, Chrissy, Crowley 0221, Sia, Crystal Prime, Dead Slime, Death is Mercy, Deathless Dragonlord, Demon Xenomorph 1987, Devin Downen, Ding Dong, Dan Pep, Dragonlord Placido Saxophone, Duckwagon, Dunkler Krieger, Dystopia, Dystopia II, Enigmatic Unicorn, Feral Shivan, Guy with That Head, Hector Marino, Hoss, Huster, Jacob G, Jana B, Jason, J. Morris, Chromius, Kyle R, Lee K. Long, Legendarius, Lelouch V. Britannia with a Mustache, Lexus Fox, Lord Nishiki Enri, Lord Touch Me, Loverazer, Merovec, Mr. Shoes, Mr. Tweaker, Michael R, Michael Y, Nope, Oh Hell No, Normal Toad, Oh Kill, Overlord General Gasper, Paddy Pantum, Personage, Ruru, Primus 11, Rhinomere, Kune Caracos P, Shergox's Daddy, Shadow Lightning Wolf, Shrine Keeper, Sir Axolotl, Super Tier Magic Batista Bomb, Supreme Cheese, Staris, Ted, Texas Deer, The Orc Warboss, Rock Ed Smasher, T.E. Wang, Vash Hawkeye, Vegito 27, Venture Fanatic, Wilhelm, Zinukai, and Sonagon. Thanks guys. Anyway, have a nice day, and I hope to see you all again soon on my next video.